All right, this is a Daredevil run, which you really don't hear a lot about of. This kind of era is right after he goes to San Francisco. He actually is coming back from San Francisco at the beginning of this. And then it really transitions into just some wacky superhero stuff, which doesn't feel like the latter of Daredevil at all. It's 1974 to 1976. It covers Daredevil 108 through 132 and Marvel 2-in-1 number 3, which kind of crosses over with the storyline at the time. And it's Epic Collection Volume 6. It's called Watch Out for Bullseye, and obviously you're assuming Bullseye shows up in this volume here, and you'd assume correctly. So he starts out, it's you got your little Black Widow relationship, and she's struggling as Daredevil's got a sort of cosmic gal he's going off with at the time, and that she's in the first couple of issues before she disappears. And then Daredevil ends up having to go back to New York to solve some crises as this happens. And so Shauna the She-Devil shows up, and there's a bad guy lurking in the background, and he's causing all sorts of problems here. Now, when he gets back, he learns that Foggy Nelson, who was presumed dead, is not actually dead. And he is then just trying to figure out who shot him and caused a problem. Foggy's got a little sister he didn't tell Daredevil about, and of course she's interested in Daredevil. This is done by Steve Gerber, and Sal Buscema does the art. Sal Buscema's art is fantastic. Looks really good and clean throughout all of this right here. And you get some different artists over the course of this. That like there's a few different different writers and artists, and it does lead to some inconsistencies over the course of this. Now the samurais, Silver Samurai is working for this bad guy as they kind of like ramp this up. And who is this? Who is the problem? And of course, it ends up being Mandrell, who is who's leading this entire like group of things. Very odd sort of villain for Daredevil. And I guess he's coming back after, the She-Devil stuff, which he dealt with in her book and in Kazar, which I didn't read either of those. So I don't really know how that happened. Now, Steve Gerber wrote this, and Gene Colan is back on art duties. And they capture the White House. And of course, the other thing they did, which is really ridiculous, this is like very, very much old school cheesecake kind of plot lines here. Gene Colan's art's beautiful too. And they put Mandrell's face on the on Mount Rushmore. like those kind of, and they're like, this is going to help me take over the world, and it's and they captures the White House to take over the world too. Like the president moved elsewhere, but he's in the White House, and Daredevil has to deal with it. So that plot line finally ends, and Daredevil fights with Gladiator again. They kind of go back to some standard fare here. Black Widow shows up, and eventually Black Widow and him and his relationship just leave. She does this thing where she's like, I'm losing my identity to being with you. And then she leaves. Very, very much just it feels like a reset kind of thing right here. I actually like Steve Gerber's writing quite a bit in this. And it's I think his are pretty fun. This is a deal with Swamp Thing where Foggy's sister's involved. She's got some serum code or whatever she found that the government was making and was going to expose all of it. And of course, bad guys want to take it over. And so Swamp Thing and Daredevil kind of team up to stop that down in Florida. And he rescues her, and then they come back finally. And they're wacky superhero tales. These are it very much does not feel like the later Dark Daredevil that you'll get here. But these flowed really well, and I really had a lot of fun with this. There's one where they fight the owl, and this is kind of the end of the Black Widow relationship a little bit. And then after this, Gary Conway takes over the writing, and it gets okay. So I mean, he's fighting. He fights with the ringmaster, and some people get involved with that. It goes, Gary Conway really brings it back to just like a lot of classic Marvel villains, and some of the art really doesn't stay as good either because it's taken over by Bob Brown, and he's fine. It's just I'd say he doesn't have the pizzazz, and his figures are a little stiffer than like Gene Colan. I think Sal Buscemi this is a famous panel right here where Daredevil's slapping Black Widow in the butt and saying, "Get out of here." What does he say? Why don't you go slip into something barely legal? I want my date to be the most gorgeous thing at the parties. I said, move it, darling. Couldn't get away with that these days. Oh my gosh. Very funny stuff. And that gets towards the end of their relationship here. But yeah, the art like kind of loses a little bit of its flair here. Now, eventually Klaus Janson, who worked with Frank Miller, takes over the inking duties. And once he does that, the panels get a little more interesting. And of course, after that, Tony Isabella writes a storyline, and I really don't like Tony Isabella's writing. It's a Shield story where he gets into things, and it just adds to the inconsistency of the characters. He just does a very short storyline here, and then eventually Marv Wolfman takes over after this Shield storyline. Let's get through it. Gosh. And when Marv Wolfman takes over, it's good and bad. Like, I'd say that like the plot flows pretty well. He's fighting. This is a really neat plot he has, where there's a Golden Age pulp character, and you can see that what Klaus Janson is now taking over the inks. It just adds a depth of shadow that Bob Brown's art didn't have in the prior issues. Pretty cool. But this pulp character, like it's a guy who like his father like created the pulp character, and he felt like he didn't get his money. And so he's harassing the publisher and pretending to go out there, and he's killing people as a vigilante, and Daredevil's putting a stop to him. Now, I got to say, in this volume, there's a modern Daredevil issue where, like, I guess the Chips Zdarsky stuff, like Daredevil's like fretting over accidentally having killed someone. There's an issue in here where like Daredevil throws one of the villains off the like a building, and he's like, "Oh well, he's dead now." And so I don't understand like the modern superhero, like where, and I could rant about this for a long time. Like the only thing they care about is not killing the villain so that the villain can go attack everybody again. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And back in the day, they really didn't have that morals. That was not the only superhero moral that they would have, is don't kill the villain. Like, they didn't have those morals back then. Very bizarre modern tellings of things, which don't really make sense because, again, if you just like let Bullseye go rampant, you know, it's like he's just going to come back and do it again, right? And that's what we find in all these modern superhero books that don't really feel like there's a fulfilling thing to make sense. So Bullseye really hasn't shown up yet, as you can see. Now, I'd say Marv Wolfman, when he gets into these stories, Daredevil feels a lot more like Spider-Man than he does Matt Murdock and Daredevil. He's quipping a lot more in his fights. It's a happy-go-lucky kind of superhero. He actually does the Spider-Man plot where, like, for a couple issues there, he goes, "I'm not even going to be Daredevil anymore because it just hurts the people I love." Like, he does the Spider-Man thing in here. Now, there's a really weird side plot here, which kind of doesn't make sense, where this girl shows up and she has Daredevil's house key. And she's like, "Oh, my boyfriend used to own this apartment, so I guess it's the same key." I don't know how it's the same key. But it is, and you see she looks a bit crazy here, and she just like starts like kind of making moves on him like immediately, and it's like, wait a minute, like, why? She's in the house, he's just accepting this, and then towards the end of like this book, like she's kind of almost girlfriend with Daredevil, like, and they kind of happens off screen. It's like, gosh, that was not a well written plot point. Didn't work out very well. Eventually, Bullseye does show up. He's a guy from Vietnam who's gone kind of crazy after the war, and we all know who Bullseye is, and he can throw anything and make it into a weapon, and he's holding people hostage for money, and of course Daredevil eventually he ends up taking Daredevil to a circus. Again, this is the second circus we've seen in this deal, and ends up having a big fight with Daredevil, and it's a 2-issue deal. It's a really fun storyline. It is the last storyline of this, and that's where it wraps up after Daredevil finally narrowly defeats him for this deal, and that's it. So interesting stuff. Steve Gerber, I think, was the best writer out of this bunch. I thought his stuff was a little bit more fun, even though if it was a little more wacky. And I feel like Marv Wolfman really didn't dial the character of Daredevil in right, and I think his new squeeze after Black Widow leaves is a lady who really doesn't make a lot of sense to be in his life. On the other front, what's his name? Foggy loses an election because he was the DA before this, and he goes back to, and they go back and they reset everything to where they're just attorneys again. So this feels like a middle sort of resetting stage of Daredevil, trying to move him back to the classic. And this is what happens a lot in the 70s, is they like kind of undo a lot of the character developments that have been moving on in a lot of titles in Marvel. As they're trying to move to brand management rather than really developing characters too much. Now, Marv Wolfman, again, did bring in some villains at least, and Daredevil doesn't really have any iconic villains at this point. So, you know, the whole Kingpin thing really doesn't become a thing till Frank Miller. The Bullseye thing really starts here. Of course, you got the Beetle a little bit, but those are just like, those are not as memorable for the people who love Daredevil as the Bullseye and Kingpin storylines. I still liked it. I still had a lot of fun with this, despite some of the ups and downs. I thought the art was a lot of fun, and I like the bright colors of the 70s. It's good stuff. I call this a 7.5 out of 10, and that's it for me. Hit the like and subscribe button. We'll be back soon.